Another episode of the ISO. Myself, your host, Dan Dickau on the Gonzaga Nation Media Network. Today's guest, the number 3 pick in the '02 NBA draft. I barely squeaked into the first round. My guest probably knew where he was going after Yao Ming and after Jay Williams, none other than Mike Dunleavy. Mike, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah, let's go back to 2002 because you were kind of in that mix of being drafted between 3, 4, 5 from what I can remember. But it was a unique draft in that the European and the overseas attention just boomed. You had Yao Ming at 1, and then you had Nene Hilario, Skittish Billy. You had so many of these other guys that we didn't really necessarily know much about. But you were kind of at the top of a lot of draft boards. Walk us through how that was for you during that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were kind of hinting at it earlier. It was actually a relatively easy draft process for me because everybody knew Yao was going number one, and then the Bulls were going to take Jay Will. So after that, for me, it was like I was going 3 or 4 to Golden State or Memphis. So, obviously you hear about the stories of guys sitting in the green room and not knowing when they're going to be picked and sweating it out. But I had a pretty good idea. And really up until like the day before the draft, I knew the Warriors were going to take me. So I enjoyed it. It was a fun experience. I had my family there in New York and knew I was going to the Warriors, or 99% sure. So it was a fun time. And for me, the hardest part about it really was the decision to come out. I was a junior, just finished up my junior year, had a good year at Duke, and I was really focused on coming back for my senior year. We wanted to try and win another national championship, and just the NBA opportunity presented itself. I talked to my dad, who was in the NBA at the time, and said, "Hey, listen, I think you should think about putting your name in. You could go really high. We'll see. We'll get some feedback." And then next thing you know, it's like he's going to go in top 10. It's like top 5. He's going to go third pick. It's like, sorry. I went to Coach K. I was like, "Coach, sorry, but like I'm going to be the 3rd pick in the draft. Like I got to go." And he understood. And also the following year, we knew LeBron was coming out. They had Darko, who was considered to be like a top 3 pick. So like I couldn't even go back to school and improve my stock. So the decision ended up being easy, and the draft night was fun. But the whole draft process now as an executive is an interesting one.
Yeah, you come full circle. You're now assistant general manager with the Warriors, where you're probably putting in a lot of the evaluations and the thoughts on guys and having a ton of input on who you guys select. I've read a couple of articles over the past where you were one of the guys that maybe pinpointed Jordan Poole early in his college career. When you're out scouting, what catches your eye about a guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can watch a ton of film on guys, but you want to go see them in person just to get a feel, I think, for their, for their body, their size, their height, but also like, their speed, their quickness. You can't always pick up on film, and if there's anything unique to them. And for me with Jordan, we saw it in our workouts too when we had him in pre-draft. He had this burst about him that was, I thought, coming off, playing 15 years in the NBA, I thought it was pretty unique. I thought he could be able to get by guys. And so you start with that and then you build off of it. But man, we, picking 28, and we've picked late a lot lately. We've had some higher picks. The first thing you got to know is it's tough. It's in many ways a crapshoot. You try and do as much homework and scouting as you can, but a lot of luck is involved, and you just kind of mitigate risk and make the right pick for what you think is your organization and team moving forward.
Well, you guys usually pick towards the end of the first round because you've been so good for so long. And part of that's because obviously Steph Curry is one of the greatest players of all time. When you go to practice and watch after practice, you, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, Steve Kerr, who's the best shooter in the gym?
Man, it's not me, especially anymore. Like you said, these guys are the elite of the elite. And obviously having KD here for a couple of years, he was right there. It's incredible to have a gym every day with those types of shooters. And I don't think anybody takes it for granted. And then every once in a while, you just kind of catch yourself watching Picasso paint, after practice, getting the shots up. It's pretty special. And the guy is a great shooter because, he was probably born to shoot, but he also puts the time in. The amount of time the guy puts in, the amount of shots he gets up, there's no coincidence that he's, the best that there ever was.
Well, you put a ton of time in, and you've been around the game from the time you were born. Your dad played in the NBA, coached in the NBA. You've been around it. What about like that, those innate traits of understanding the game a split second before other guys? How did you pick up on that? Was it conversations around the house? Was it just being around the game and watching practices as a kid? How did you kind of pick up that IQ that you were known for?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything, like you mentioned. It's being around the team, teams that he coached at practices, at games, in the locker rooms, on team planes. Hearing the chatter. It's at night. My dad's home watching film. After I get my homework done, going up there and watching with him. And frankly, probably half the time I wasn't paying attention, but you just kind of pick up things by osmosis. So, just watching game after game over the years, you pick things up. And you start to understand how the game is supposed to be played, and had some really good coaches over the years, which helps too. But I definitely notice now you see guys that are young, and then they're young, where they also really haven't been around the game a long time. Well, that's where you say, hey, he doesn't have a great feel, or he struggles with IQ, and you can't really blame them. They haven't been around it much. Whereas I grew up around the game, and that was certainly a strength of my game is understanding how a coach wants to play, and understanding my teammates around me, and spacing and flow and all that. It made up for some of the deficiencies I had, maybe with athleticism or strength, things like that.
I played for your dad for 1 year with the Clippers, and it was one of those things where he had a number system for everything on the floor. So a lot of people know sevens or pick and rolls, but it would be a down screen's a 6, a cross screen's an 8. So you had them together, they're 18s. Is that the way you grew up learning the game? Like you'd be calling out numbers to people on the floor, in youth basketball, and they'd look at you like you're crazy?
You know what? I should know his system better, but the amount of people that come up to me that played for him or coached with him or coached against him is like, oh, your guy's system. I know all his plays and all his different calls. It was so interesting. And the playbook was super, super deep and intricate, but it was all pretty learnable based on the number system you're mentioning. I didn't play against my dad's teams a ton, and I didn't have to know his offense growing up because I didn't play for him. So I hear all about it, but I didn't really know it. But it definitely is one thing I always pride myself on as a coach's son. Like, you got to know the plays, you got to know the coverages. My dad always said that you got to know that. So, as a pro, I always wanted to make sure, scouting reports and pregame plans and all that, never make a mistake on that type of stuff.
Yeah, I still remember how detailed that playbook is, and I use some of the terminology with my son's AAU team I coach, but lots of good stuff there. You're a good player in high school. You and Casey Jacobson, who's a good friend of mine, he's been a guest on the show a couple times, were kind of the wings that were both McDonald's All-American level wings on the West Coast. He mentioned he wanted to go to Duke, and it was kind of down to you and him who made their decision first. What was it about Duke, and how easy was it to say yes to Coach K?
Well, I think growing up in, I guess going to high school in Portland, we kind of grew up all over, but going to high school in Portland is a long way from Duke. But, even back then, they had the prestige, the 91, 92 back-to-back teams. I kind of grew up watching that. And frankly, in high school, I didn't reach the level of being able to go to Duke until I was probably a junior or senior. So it wasn't really on my radar. But when they came calling, it was incredibly appealing. I also looked at North Carolina. I looked at Stanford. Stanford had a great program and obviously great education. So looked at all those schools. I took my time. I made a thorough decision. But at the end of the day, what Coach K and Duke had to offer was pretty enticing, and ended up going there. Casey went to Stanford. We had some good battles over the years, and he's a buddy, and he had a nice career, and he's on the dark side of things like you now. So it's amazing the way things come full circle.
So you mentioned earlier when you knew that you were a projected top 3 or 4 pick, you had to go to talk to Coach K and tell him you were leaving. Was that an easy conversation? Is that a hard conversation? Because, I've talked to a few people in the past that have played at Duke, and they say Coach K is an intense coach, but he's also very loving and understanding. What was it like for you first to tell him that you were leaving?
Yeah, I think it was tough, mostly just because it was abrupt. I think, my plan was always to be there 4 years. I think he expected that. And then this situation presented itself. So I think it kind of came out of the blue for everyone. So initially it was challenging. I think he pushed back a little bit, which totally understood. But at the end of the day, he enabled me to make the decision. I made it. What was best for me. He understood it. And, here we are 20 years later. I've got a great relationship with him, lean on him for things. And, he's one of the most impactful people that in my basketball life. And, I always look back and appreciate that.
Having that kind of inner relationship with people at Duke, like I'm sure you do, very similar to me at Gonzaga, you kind of have an inner view of all the workings. You have an understanding of the early teams, like with Jay Billis, Johnny Dawkins, and then the Bobby Hurley and Christian Laettner teams. And then your team, I think it was your sophomore year, you won the title. And now they're, literally you go to Duke because you're a one and done, essentially. How much pride do you have in that program? And is it truly as connected as people think it is?
Yeah, it is. I mean, they have this thing now, the brotherhood, which is all the alumni players that, stay connected through, texts and emails and get-togethers at games or Final Fours and things like that. And it's great. But there is a network that's real. And I don't think that existed as much when I first got there, but it's grown over the years. Got to give a lot of credit to some of these guys that came after us, Nolan Smith and John Shire, have done a really good job of connecting the generations of players. But when I was there and leading up to going there, I prided myself on knowing the history of the program, knowing that, the years that Coach K was there, the players he coached, the teams he coached, and he referenced those teams a lot. So whether you read about him or you heard what he said about him, you knew him. And I knew those guys, like the Jay Billises and the Johnny Dawkins. Those guys were around when I was playing, and obviously they're around now still. And I like to know the guys now that are coming in the NBA. These young guys, even though they're one and done, they've played. We all share the same bond of playing for Duke and playing for Coach K. That'll change now, but I don't think it's going to be drastic. John understands the ins and outs of the program and what it all means. So I'm really looking forward to watching him and his staff coach and seeing where kind of the next chapter of Duke basketball goes.
As an assistant GM, you crisscross the country throughout the year evaluating teams and players at practices and games. Do you have a certain amount of pride when you go to Duke and watch a Duke player? Do you kind of have to take a step back when you're taking your notes and your evals? Or has it been pretty easy for you to give a clear and easy eval on guys, whether they're from Duke or from another school?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I guess the toughest part, I think, for me going to a Duke game or practice is like not showing up with my Duke gear on. They're like, hey, I got a little bit of a job to do here. I got to watch through the lens of a scout as opposed to, an alumni and pulling for my school. So there's a little bit of both. But, I think the good thing with the Duke guys is the relationships. You get a good idea of who they are. I can talk to, Chris Carrawell or John Shire, the guys on the staff, Coach K, and really get a good feel for the player and the person versus, you have good relationships with other universities and coaches, but maybe not as good as I do at Duke. So, I mean, it's certainly an advantage. But yeah, I mean, you got a job to do. You can't put too much bias into it in terms of the player you're picking. You got to go forth and make the right decision. And of course, our group, our scouts and stuff, they always like to give me a hard time about Duke and keep me level-headed about it. So it's good.
On a typical season, lead up to a season, you guys got training camp that's going to be starting in a couple weeks. You got to get out and see fall practices, because I would imagine that's important for you to eval guys early in the season and practice where they're being taught, where then you can see how much they absorb and learn, and then they are able to perform with those characteristics the coach wants. How much do you get out as a GM during the early season and then during the season?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I love getting out early to see the practices, like you mentioned. I like to go to practices where there's a decent amount of pro talent, young guys, some freshmen that you haven't seen, you don't know from high school as much, but also schools and programs that have, good coaching staffs. Last year spent some time up at Gonzaga. You get to see Coach Few, our guy Brian Michelson, but also they got players. Chet's there. You go see players. So I like to find the schools that have that in the fall and get a head start on stuff. And then end of October, you got the practice. November is super heavy. You got a Champions Classic this year, the PK 85 tournament in Portland. You're just trying to get volume, see as many high-level players and programs you can see in November, December. And then you kind of whittle it down and say, who do I want to go out and see, or who do I still need to see in the conference season? And it plays itself out pretty well. Just like to be able to see every player that we would consider taking in the draft. Hate drafting a guy that maybe you didn't see live. For me, everybody's different. For me personally, I like to have that comfort level.
How does it work in the Warriors organization? I had Chad Buchanan, the GM of the Pacers, on a week or two back, and we kind of talked about how they did things. How does the Warriors work as far as, Bob Myers makes the final decision, but takes input from each play scout as well as the assistant GM yourself? How does it work with you? And then do you ever feel like you have to give an extra little bit of emphasis to the guy that you really like, or is it always kind of become a consensus on who you want to pick?
Yeah, we've got a pretty good group collaborative process. We've got 2 great full-time college scouts who scour the country all year long. And then we have probably another 5 to 6 of us who are out there seeing games. While as also seeing, we're seeing pro games too. We're seeing, handling other things that are go on. So we've got a group that's probably 8 guys that kind of put our draft board together, build our draft thoughts, ideas. Bob's pretty hands off. I mean, he certainly goes out and sees players. He tracks things during the year. He's reading the reports, but he really lets us kind of dictate everything. And then kind of the last, week or so, he comes in, he gets a feel for where we're at on things. He's watching more film on guys, and ultimately hits his call. And Joe Lacob's very involved as well, our owner. It's kind of those 2 guys' call, but the rest of us are sort of, doing the legwork, building it up, and putting us in a spot where, hey, we're picking between these 3 or 4 guys. Let's really hone in on these guys, or, kind of building the strategy out. And, Bob and Joe kind of make the final decision.
So if you kind of have it whittled down to 3 or 4 guys, I know lots of teams will throw out different smoke screens out there, and you don't have to give me the Warriors process, but how does that typically work? You guys would bring in extra players during the draft that might be around that certain area you guys are picking?
Yeah, I don't know that we've ever done any stuff like that where we're trying to lead anyone astray. I think for us, it's a matter of just, okay, we collect as much information on, where guys are in our range. And then, just talking to teams, being honest with teams, but not spilling all the beans. I don't think too many teams do that. So it's definitely, there's a bit of game theory to it. We don't like to lead anybody astray. I don't think we put too much stuff out there in the media that's inaccurate. The media may pick up things or speculate on things, as far as who we like or who we may take. But I think for the most part, we're pretty good about keeping things close to the vest. And, when the time comes to make the pick, we've settled on it, maybe a day or 2 before with our board, but things are fluid during the draft and things can change. Sometimes you want to make a trade, but we've got a pretty good process that's sound, and we feel good about the success we've had lately with drafting young guys.
You played 14, 15 years in the NBA. Obviously, I'm sure with your dad's background as a coach, you might have had some interest in getting into coaching. What was it about front office work that was appealing to you? Because I spent 1 year with the Blazers after done playing, doing some player development and front office scouting. And it was great. I enjoyed it, but it's also a grind where you can miss out on some things with the family, which is one of the reasons broadcasting has been so great for me.
Sure.
What was the transition like for you?
Yeah, I think it was my appeal for the front office versus coaching. I think, because my dad did both, right? He was kind of GM president with the Bucks and the Clippers while coaching. So I saw both sides of it. I would say the 2 things that appealed to me at this position were lifestyle, like you mentioned, with family and flexibility, but also just the strategy, the long-term thinking aspect of it. A little bit different than the day-to-day of coaching. I'm certainly interested in do a lot of stuff with our group with player development, but that's the coach's area, as is X's and O's and game strategy and all that. Cool stuff, very interesting. But for me, I do like the long-term strategy thinking. If a coach makes maybe 100 decisions in a day or a week, as a front office person, you're making, maybe 10 decisions in a year, but they're all pretty important and impactful. And I kind of like that idea of it, and it's gone well. I'm enjoying it and working with good people. So happy with my decision so far.
You still play any pickup basketball?
Man, you know what? I wish I could. I got out of the game pretty clean injury wise with my hip. I do not have a good hip, and my left hip's bugging me, and it's tough. So other than with like mess around with my kids in the driveway, I do not play much. But honestly, I don't miss it too much. Picked up other things like golf, like pickleball, things like that you compete in. So right now, I'm in a good space, but I don't play a lot of pickup.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've played pickup. It's crazy here in Spokane because Stockton still runs every
Oh,
Sunday open gyms,
yeah.
and he doesn't necessarily play every single weekend anymore. But he's still down there all the time, and occasionally he'll play. Last time I played and he played, I don't think he missed a shot inside of 15
Wow.
feet. It was amazing.
Wow. So you play you kind of just show up here and there. You're not consistent with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's
That's
one of
see
those
that
things.
that's actually that scares me the most because I feel like those are the type of guys that show up. You play once, every 4 months, and that's where you
Yeah.
knock on wood, blow out a knee or pull a hamstring or even worse. So that one always scares me too.
And that's one reason I haven't really gotten back into playing because one, for me, the competitive factor, right? You play at the highest level, like you want to play against the highest continually. The second one is
Yeah,
I don't want to get hurt. I'd rather be able to
yeah,
coach my son's groups than be on the
yeah.
training table. How about the golf game? Where's that at for you then? You play at Olympic? Where do you play at in San Francisco?
Yeah, there's some great courses out here. Olympic, I'm a member at Olympic, and then there's Harding Park, which is a great public course. You got some great private courses like the Cal Club, San Francisco, Lake Merced, and then you go further down the peninsula with Monterey. You got Pebble Beach, Cypress, on and on. So great golf here. Unfortunately, with 4 kids and a busy job, I don't get out as much as I like. But in summertime, we get a little downtime and been playing a lot lately. It'll taper off certainly as the season picks up. But man, I love it. The only complaint would be it just takes too long to play 18 holes. But otherwise, really, really tough, challenging game. But your ability to stay competitive with it, it's individually challenging. I've gotten the bug. I'm pretty addicted to it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Big family. It's hard to get away for 5.5, 6 hours for a round, but
Yeah.
it definitely clears your mind. Getting outside is definitely refreshing as well. When you look at the upcoming season for the Warriors, obviously you guys are one of the dynasties of all times, but what truly separates the team that you guys have put together from some other really good teams in the league right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, we have a level of talent that's, in the top 5 or 10 that you could easily say, enables us to compete. But the biggest thing is just having Draymond, having Steph, having Clay, guys that are still playing at an extremely high level, but have been there before. They have that experience that gives our other players confidence. It enables them to grow. But when the playoffs come around, it gives us, if we're healthy, it gives us a chance, I think, against any team in the league. And so that's what, we were hoping for last year, and it panned out pretty well. And again, kind of trying to defend and go back to back. That's what we'll rely on. We'll need some luck. We'll need some health. And I think the league is better this year as teams get healthier. But, we feel as long as Steph's at a MVP type level, we're going to have a chance to have a really good team and win it.
You mentioned Brian Michelson earlier. A lot of people that listen to this podcast are obviously Gonzaga fans. You played high school basketball with B. Mike, as he's known. I think he's one of the up-and-coming assistant coaches in all of college basketball. He's ready to be a head coach when it's the right opportunity, just like Tommy Lloyd at Arizona. You got any B. Mike stories that you can share real quick?
Man, he was a really good high school player. A big reason we won the state championship in Oregon in 1999. He was before his time in the sense of like a plus wingspan. I just always remember Brian never looking like the quickest or fastest guy in the gym, but he was like incredibly effective with, defending, getting his hands on balls, just making plays. And the guy's just freakishly long. I'd be interested to know what his height versus wingspan is. But to me, he was, you hear Jay Billis on draft night talk about length and long and all this stuff. I always first think of Brian because that helps him become a pretty effective player.
Yeah, no, he absolutely had a long wingspan. You'd think you'd be by him in open gym or at practice, and then
Yeah.
his arms would come out
Yeah.
of nowhere and poke the ball away. So, well, Mike, I really appreciate the time. It's always good to catch up and see you on the road when I'm doing broadcasting, and I've run into you when you're doing your scouting duties. So thanks for joining. Appreciate the time.